Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. You've got both Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin over at the G20 summit. They actually rearranged the seating. They were going to do it according to, I don't know, the Western alphabet, but then that would put Putin and Obama too close together, so they decided to use the Cyrillic alphabet or something. I mean, I know what they did. They just changed the alphabet they used to get these guys as far apart as they possibly can be. So now, remember, Obama says no boots on the ground. We're going to talk about that in the second hour. This is not realistic. I mean, we got Judge Napolitano saying, hey, look, if you're going to launch missiles, you got to have boots on the ground. You got to have somebody there to guide those missiles to their targets. So he thinks that Kerry was basically lying to Congress, and Obama's been lying to Congress by saying there are no boots on the ground. They're saying, look, if the personnel is not in uniform, they don't count it as boots on the ground. So if it's not somebody in uniform, then they're going to technically say, hey, we don't have boots on the ground. You could have all kinds of military personnel over there. As long as they're not in uniform, then Obama and Kerry are saying, hey, that doesn't count as boots on the ground. But Napolitano is saying, look, this is just ridiculous to think that you can send bombs in there and not have boots on the ground to paint the sites or to guide them to their target. At any rate, Putin is saying, look, if Obama starts sending missile strikes into Syria, I'm going to send a missile shield equipment to Syria. I'm going to help them deflect all of those missiles coming in from that cowboy Barack Obama. I've got a column up today at our news site, onenewsnow.com, also up at our blog site, rightlyconcerned.com. The title of my piece is Staying Out of Syria is the Christian Thing to Do. That's the title of my piece. Staying Out of Syria is the Christian thing to do. And I believe that for moral, ethical, and biblical reasons, the United States should not drop bombs on Syria. Now, for one thing, if we cross Syria's boundary, this is a country that has not attacked us. Even John Kerry said yesterday they represent no imminent threat to the United States. If there are any national interests involved, they are way, way down the line. They don't represent any kind of an imminent threat. And I believe that if we cross their boundary, we are showing a lack of respect for their national sovereignty. Now, if Syria had attacked us, or if they represented an imminent threat, then yes, we have the moral right to defend ourselves. We have the moral right, the ethical right, the biblical right to cross their boundary to defend our national interest and to defend our people. Absent that, absent the moral justification of self-defense, we have no ethical or moral right to be there. We're just trespassers. You go to Acts 17:26, it's very clear that God has designed the boundaries. God has drawn the boundaries within which nations live, and he expects us to respect those boundaries. Remember, Moses did. He wanted to go through Edom. The king of Edom said, no, don't want you passing through here. Moses said, we won't trample anything. We won't take anything. We'll pay for anything. We just want to pass through. He said no, and Moses respected his national sovereignty, respected the boundaries, and went around. Now, Syria's not invited us in. That'd be another way. It'd be legitimate to go in if you got invited in by the government that has authority from God to make those kind of decisions, or if they'd attacked us, but they haven't invited us. They haven't attacked us. We've got no national interest in Syria, and we have no ethical justification to invade. We do not want foreign armies or militants crossing our borders, and it doesn't matter to us how just their cause is in their own eyes. We do not want them coming across our borders. Think 9/11 here. Now, they felt, those 9/11 hijackers, they felt absolutely, completely, totally, 100% justified in crossing our boundaries in order to destroy us. We don't want that. We don't want militants. We don't want foreign armies coming across our shores, across our boundaries. And the golden rule, I believe, requires us to extend the same courtesy to the other nations of the world. Now, it's not to say we don't have a humanitarian catastrophe in Syria, because we do. But the question you got to ask, we had 100,000 people died already there before the first chemical weapon was ever used. Where was all this urgency? Where was all this compassion for the first 100,000 victims? You got 1,000 victims, maybe 1,400 of these chemical weapons attacks, and that's terrible. That's horrible. That's an inhumane way to go. But the reality is dead is dead. It doesn't matter whether you took a bullet to the brain or a toxin to the nerve system. Dead is dead. Why was there no compassion, no urgency over 100,000 deaths of innocent civilians? And the reality is, I've got a story in the stack we'll get to a little bit later. The Russians have compiled a 100-page report that I think is fairly persuasive that the chemical attack that was launched in March was actually launched by the rebels. So the point is, there is considerable doubt over whether the chemical attacks in March and in August, whether they were launched by the rebels or whether they were launched by the Assad regime or one of each. We just don't know. We've got no smoking gun, and the Russians have pretty good justification for arguing that the March chemical weapons attack was actually launched by the rebels. So it's just premature, and it's impulsive, and it's rash for us to go in there until we have clear and convincing proof about who the actual bad actors are here. We got no right to intervene anyway, but particularly if we don't even know who is responsible. You know, you got a civil war going on there in Syria, and I think the right thing to do is we have to let the Syrian people, out of respect for their national sovereignty, we have to let the Syrian people work this out. That's what we did in Civil War. We had a civil war. We spilled a lot of blood to get that thing resolved, but that was for us to resolve internally. And we got to realize, you know, every humanitarian crisis in the world does not demand a military response from the United States. If it did, there are virtually unlimited places all around the world all the time in which we could be involved, especially when you look at tensions in Muslim lands. You got the Shia-Sunni feud. That's been going on for 1,400 years. We're not going to be able to go in, drop a few bombs on people, and resolve 1,400 years of vitriolic, lethal conflict. Just not going to happen. And as I said yesterday, it'd be one thing if we had any indication that our armed intervention in Muslim countries was actually doing any good, but we do not. And especially every time we intervene in a Muslim nation, we make things worse for the Christian minorities who live there. We're a Christian nation. If we're going to use military might, it's my absolute conviction that the minimum thing that we ought to do is to be sure that when we as a Christian nation go to war, that our intervention is beneficial to those who share our Christian heritage. Instead, it has been absolutely harmful to them. You know, we went into Iraq. The church was fairly stable there. It was protected by Saddam. Now it's being wiped out. You got Christians fleeing Iraq in droves. About 2/3 of the Christians that used to live there, they're gone. Afghanistan, under our watch, the last church got razed to the ground in 2010. You go to Egypt. The United States intervened, removed Mubarak, got the Muslim Brotherhood. Now you got civil war. You've got Muslim jihadists out there actually using spray paint and painting X's on Christian homes and Christian businesses in Egypt. So the Muslims will know which businesses, which homes, which structures to burn to the ground. And you look at Syria. I mentioned this yesterday, but if you ask the Christians in Syria, would you prefer Assad, who's a brutal dictator? Would you prefer him or these Muslim goons who are trying to replace him? They would say, we prefer Assad every single day of the week. Assad provided some protection for the Christian church, and these Muslim jihadist groups will represent ongoing, very severe threats to the Christian church. And so the reality is, because Islam is a religion of darkness and death, there are no good guys to back in Syria. Bottom line, we ought to just stay out of Syria. It is the Christian thing to do. Well, let's grab a call before the end of the hour. Let's go to Bob in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Bob, welcome to Focal Point with Brian Fisher. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brian, I hope you're having a blessed day.
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
Just a quick comment, two topics on the news this morning. Syria, for one. I hate to say it, but I have so much distrust for our leaders that I'm willing to entertain Mr. Putin's 100-page report on Syria. I mean, he used to be one of our enemies, but I'm almost willing to entertain his report. And secondly, on Chicago schools trying to teach elementary schools about sex ed, I think with the low SAT scores in our countries and kids graduating high school who can't read, I think maybe we should concentrate on, I don't know, reading, writing, arithmetic, basic education will probably be preferable to some of these liberal agendas.
Well, and Bob is exactly right. You might not have heard about this, but they are starting sex ed in Chicago, mandatory sex education in kindergarten. And part of the agenda in the sex education starting in kindergarten, Chicago public schools, is to brainwash these kids into believing that same-sex marriages are A-OK, hunky-dory, perfectly acceptable alternative to heterosexual unions. So that's going on. And like Bob is saying, you look at the illiteracy rate in Chicago. I mean, just in general, we might want to think about actually teaching kids how to read and write rather than how to normalize homosexual behavior. All right, Bob, listen, I appreciate that very much. Thank you for the call. And just to follow up on what Bob alluding to this Russian report, and again, Russia is, they are not our friend. Russia's not our friend. I got a story from BuzzFeed, way left website. They're saying, hey, was Mitt Romney right about everything? This is BuzzFeed saying Mitt Romney, it turns out, was right about every position he took in the campaign. He was warning us about Russia. He was warning us about the implementation of Obamacare. Turns out he was right. That's a liberal website saying that. But the Russians now released a 100-page report talking about this March 19 chemical attack. It killed 26 people, injured 86. And they have fairly convincing evidence that it was not something that was produced and dropped by the Syrian military. I'll walk through a little bit of that evidence for you when we get back. You are listening to Focal Point on AFR Talk. We'll be right back after the news. Stay with us. Take more of your phone calls. 888-589-8840.